Hello and welcome along. So, this time we're going to talk about the Primarchs again. It's been a while, and this I thought we could go a little bit more into them as characters. So, not so much as their characteristics, like how good are they at something, but more as how well written are they as a character in the books, particularly the Horus Heresy series. So how interesting are they to read about? How much influence they have on events? How much of a character arc do they have, and so on. So I'm going to do this is kind of in reverse order. So the least to the most interesting or well developed, well written characters. So I'm going to start off with two that I think are pretty much close to irrelevant in the books. They have, which is Ferrus, Manus, and Mortarion. I think essentially there's very little written about them. They don't feature much. Obviously, Manus in particular is dead very early on. He's a key character in that sense because he's the first Primarch to be killed, and that's an important event. But he doesn't really have much in the way of character development. Obviously, it's hard to when you're dead. And also, he just doesn't really do much because he's dead. So he can't really have much influence on events. And even with the various flashbacks and so on, they flesh out the characters with to pre-heresy times. He's not really involved much, and he isn't that. And so when he very rarely is, it's not that interesting or that impressive, to be honest. So he just generally comes across as a kind of a boring person that you probably wouldn't be that interested in anyway, even if you met him in real life. Also, someone who would probably kill you because you I don't know, you just broke off the wrong side of the bed. But he doesn't have the same kind of deep, interesting motivation. Some of the other Primarchs have like interesting backstories of why they might randomly kill you, like a curse, for example. But with Ferrus Manus, is basically just he's a bit of a dick. And then so the Mortarion, he's another one. He's not just a bit of a dick; he's a total asshole. But he's pretty boring, to be honest. Let's be honest. He's just a guy that's hates everybody, nobody likes. Yes, he's somewhat underrated, and he is more powerful than the others give him credit for, which I think the books do a reasonable job at showing that he is a bit more to him than kind of we thought. But still, he's still pretty boring. So no one's crying out for more Mortarion books, are they? Let's be honest. He isn't particularly interesting character, but he's useful to have him in the books, as kind of a foil for other people to work with. You've just got that he's kind of a bit of a generic bad guy in that he's just irredeemably a bad person, but without the kind of interesting backstory and complex personality that some of the other bad guys have, which makes them much more useful and much more intriguing to read about. And the other thing about Mortarion is he's kind of outshone by his own legion. The Death Guard are actually more interested than he is, and even even the Chaos Gods prefer Typhus over Mortarion. I don't really. He's a bit of a letdown generally as a Primarch. So moving on from those two, the next ones are the ones there's a lot of writing about them in the series. They're kind of major characters generally speaking, but they're still they're not that interesting. They're relatively boring characters, to be honest. And now this might be a bit controversial because these guys are most of the loyalists, to be honest. So you've got Guilliman, Dawn, the Lion, Corax, and Russ. I don't think they're particularly interesting in the books. I think they're quite bland. They don't really grow as characters. They don't really develop much. You don't really get to see much of who they are and why they are the way they are. They have quite a lot of influence on the story. So to be fair to them, but that's because they're involved in a lot more of the story than some of the other Primarchs who don't really get much written about them. Guilliman, of course, is very important in Imperium, the history of the Imperium. But so he's a big hitter in that way. But he's quite he's a very boring character. Let's be honest. He's the kind of person that you you don't you would make excuses to avoid going to an occasion with Guilliman. You don't seek him out because he's an interesting guy to be around, and that's much the same as the others, to be honest. Korak spends a lot of the time just moping about, being a mopey bastard, um, blaming everybody, blaming himself a lot, but also kind of being quite mistreating the people around him because of how depressed he is all the time. He's pretty depressing to actually read about, to be honest. Doesn't treat his allies particularly well. He's not like the kind of person that's going to randomly murder his allies like some of the other Primarchs, but he just treats them poorly. These people are incredibly loyal to him, done great things for him, saved his life often, and he still treats them pretty badly. He doesn't give them really any credit for what they've done. He makes this big mistake, obviously. Well, first he makes a big mistake of getting his legion wiped out on Isstvan 5, but that's probably forgivable. But he then makes this big mistake where he tries to recreate new legionaries rapidly using technology given to him by the Emperor, which the Alpha Legion corrupt, and he ends up with these corrupted Marines, or not corrupted in the sort of chaos sense, but corrupted in that gene seed is corrupted, and they're all mutants, and well, the majority of them are, and that is his kind of big failure, and he hates himself for that as well. And so he's got these two big things hanging over him all the time, and he never really gets over it. And it's kind of a bit too much in the end. And he's like, oh god, do I have to read more about Korax? So that's why I feel that way about Korax. The Lion, he's a bit more complex than the others. Maybe he's not as boring in that sense, but he's just a bit of an unpleasant person. Again, you don't really want to. He's not. Yeah, he will kill his allies out of hand. To be honest, he is quite violent and unpredictable in that sense. So to the point where he's almost a villain. But he's just you can't. It's kind of like petulance the way he just turns on people more than anything. So yeah, reading the Lion in the series, you kind of. I can't help but root for Konrad Curze, who's one of the most awful people in existence. And you think when their rivalry is like, yeah, I actually want Curze to win. So the Lion is that bad, and he's not bad, like kind of like evil bad. Just like, I mean, he's just that unpleasant. He's just like, I don't really like the guy. And again, he's someone who mistreats his allies really badly, manipulates his allies. It's the story of Luther, who famously turns against him, and it's quite an interesting story actually. He's probably more of an interesting character than the Lion himself, and that's a guy that you can see why he ends up the way he does, because the Lion kind of stole everything that should have been his from him, and the Lion is not like he's not someone who you could say it's so it's such a it's unfair that these people that should be grateful to him turned on him. He creates that situation by mistreating people like his entire life, and it's not surprising that he doesn't get this kind of deep loyalty sort of that you get from some of the other Primarchs have. Like you can never imagine an Ultramarine betraying Guilliman, or a Blood Angel betraying Sanguinius. I mean, it's just. Although I know there's some very rare occasions of these kind of things happening for turning to chaos, etc. But in general, no. But with the Dark Angels, it's quite easy to see why half the Legion turn against him, because he's just not very good at being a sort of inspirational leader. In much the same way as the Emperor's failing. So kind of like he just does stuff, doesn't tell anyone why he's doing it. He annoys a lot of people, and then he goes, "Oh, well, how did that all go wrong? I don't understand." The Lion does this as well, and so I suppose in that sense, I think he's a more interesting character than the other ones I was just talking about in terms of the way he's written as a literary character. But still, I don't think he comes across well in the books, and he's not. I don't really yearn to read about him when he comes up. Again, as I said, I'm more interested in reading about Konrad Curze because they generally are our rivals for a large portion of the Lion's bits in the book series. So who else have I mentioned? Oh, Dawn. He's even more boring than Guilliman. I mean, he's obviously a good guy generally. Sort of you can see why the Emperor leans on him, and he's kind of around a lot. Obviously, takes him back to Terra to build up the defenses of Terra and have around. He's reliable, etc. But he's boring. When you're reading about Dawn, the best thing about Dawn is his rivalry was Ferrus, who is a much more interesting character, and we'll talk about him later. But when I'm reading Dawn, the books focused around Dawn, particularly in the middle and section of the Heresy, which is where you mostly just describe, it's actually the other characters that are around him are more interesting. His own legionaries, and the kind of various enemy agents that are trying to do stuff that he's trying to stop. It's not him. He's pretty boring, and he doesn't actually do much really. I mean, he does. He's kind of just he's just like a filler in the story. So as a character, not great, even though there is quite a lot written around him, or not as much as Guilliman, obviously, or indeed the Lion. And the final one of that group I put is Russ. Again, you probably realise by now, watching some of my videos, I don't really like Russ. Maybe I should do a video one day about why I don't like him. But I think if you watch my video, Russ the Serial Loser, you'll see most of those reasons. But mainly, he just comes across as, again, a bit of a dick. He's a lot like the Lion in that they're not pleasant people. And it's almost worse to be one of the good guys and unpleasant than to be a genuine bad guy like a Conrad Kurz or an Angron, where you expect them to be dicks, Whereas Russ he's a good guy, but he's one of the good guys, he's on the supposedly right side, but he's also just an unpleasant person. He just mistreats everyone really badly. He doesn't really do that much. Whenever he does stuff, he fails. He obviously gets easily manipulated by Horus. He's a massive hypocrite as well. So unlike Mortarion, who hates people, but at least he's kind of consistent with his hatred. But Russ hates people for all sorts of reasons. But then at the same time, he is that thing, or he supports someone else who is that thing, and it's very weird the way he decides who he's going to hate. The most obvious example is his hatred of the Thousand Sons for their use of psychic powers, while he's using psychers throughout his legion. But yeah, we won't go too deep into that. I'll go on a rant on my anti-Russ rants. But anyway, again, you could say you can have bad people that are good characters, of course, and you'll notice that a lot of the traitors I haven't got to yet, so I'm going to rate them higher as characters. So it's not that. It's just not. He's not just because he's a bad person. It's because he's a boring bad person. Who it doesn't really develop as a character much at all, and you don't really get to. I don't think you get too deep into who he is and why he is the way he is. I mean, maybe that's a bit unfair because there's a bit more character development later on in the series, but still, he's still. I'm putting him in this group. Thank you very much. I'm sure many of you are going to disagree with this. That's fine. That's the kind of point. And so, if you could comment, like, subscribe, share, it'd be great. And let's see you next time.